This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Larkey! Stevenson with his own moves. Carrington. North are in front!
Hello, it's normal programming. Welcome back to North Pod. Oh boy, we lost. So I guess it's going to be a regular podcast this week. No shortage of positives and negatives. And look, it was a really fantastic game of footy if you're a Pies fan or if you're a neutral, or if you turned it off at half time and you're a North Melbourne fan. Any of those situations and you probably had a really good time watching. Unfortunately, the second half and the last quarter in particular for us was not good watching. So we will unpack all of that and go through the usuals, the podium. We'll go through positives and negatives. We'll go through team selection. We'll look a little bit ahead to next week. But there's going to be some odd vibes in this podcast because it really was a game of two halves. So I'll try to talk about it cohesively. But yeah, it's an empty feeling after a game like that. It's taken me a little while to sit down and record. I wasn't angry. I was just a bit miffed. I was a bit empty. Obviously, going into the game, we had no expectations, or certainly low expectations. And yeah, I just got more and more nervous as the game went on because that level of expectation, it has to rise once you get 40 and 50 points up. But there was not a single point in that game where I thought that we were home and hosed. I had a few people messaging me sort of celebrating early. And, as an opposition fan, I get it because an opposition team hasn't watched us this closely and doesn't know that we are well within our rights to throw this one away. And we've done it before and we did it again. So let's see what we can do in unpacking this game. In terms of team selection, there was just the one change going into the game. Bryn Teakle came in for his debut in place of Will Dawson, who was injured last week. So I guess the idea was that we were staying the same and just Teakle was coming in to play that second ruck, second or third tall forward, depending on where you want to place him there. So, makes sense. You win the game, you want to stay as unchanged as possible. Unfortunately, Jai Simkin also copped a bit of a hamstring niggle training on Friday. So he was a late out. It seems as though they probably knew that a little while out, given it happened on Friday. And it's unclear exactly how long he'll be out. You'd think if it's a hamstring, you'd probably want to take a week or two off at least. So yeah, look, we'll see. But he was a late out and Wilfield came in and Jaden Stevenson was the sub. A massive story there, which we'll talk about later in the podcast. It was another opportunity for Wilfield to come in. And a big part of the reason why I think that we knew it was a little bit earlier going into the game, Wilfield ended up playing a tagging role on Nick Dacos. And I feel like surely if you're going to make a decision like that, you're telling Wilfield, hey, you're in on Friday. Let's do some quick analysis. I'm not sure if the plan was for someone else to tag, like potentially Liam Shields, or if we just made that opportunistic decision. But yeah, it ended up being a massive story in the game. So we will talk about that in just a minute. Match result, North Melbourne 19-4. How's that for accurate goal kicking? 118. Lost to Collingwood 18-11, 119. Collingwood also were very accurate until a little bit later on when they missed a few late, but still very accurate kicking. 37 goals, 15 for the match. Super accurate kicking and hence quite a high-scoring game for the modern game. It's certainly not uncommon for one side to get to 100 points, but for both to score over 110 is pretty unusual in this day and age. And in no small part due to some accurate goal kicking. But just in general, it was a really offensive game, and I think we'll talk about that as the match goes on. Both sides defensively really struggled, and it was almost an old-fashioned shootout. It was just missing a couple of full forwards kicking absolute bags, whereas it was the Collingwood small forwards, and just a relatively even spread from us. It looked like Larkey was going to go off the chain and kick 16 if he continued his form from the first quarter, but he wasn't able to kick any more than his 4 that he kicked in the first quarter. So yeah, a really a really high-scoring game, and it's great that we were able to score more than 100 points, but we've known all year that our team defence is an issue, and we've seen that on display in conceding 119 points. Last week was the only game all year that we've kept our opposition to under 100, and it certainly looked like at times during this match that we were going to be able to do that again, but alas, we were not able to. So let's have a look at story of the game. And like I said, it was a game of two halves. There was part one and part two. It's a simplistic way of looking at it, but there was the part of the game where Nick Dacos was shut out after being tagged by Wilfill, and there was the part of the game where he was not shut out of the game and he was allegedly tagged by Liam Shields, but certainly not impacted very much by that tag. So I guess, the first part of the game, we got out to a lead of 54 points early in the third quarter. Will Phillips had been tagging Dacos pretty successfully. He hadn't been completely shut out of the game, but I would say his impact was very minimal. Wilfill similarly wasn't having much of an impact. I think at halftime it might have been 11 or 12 disposals to Dacos and 6 or 7 to Wilfill. So, you'll take that in terms of Dacos's impact was certainly limited. Most of his possessions were handballs around stoppage. They were quick, they were under pressure, they weren't, he wasn't finding space. And I think, sure, that's one component of the game, keeping the opposition's best player quiet. But, the proof was in the pudding. We were out to a massive lead. We were dominating the midfield. And the Pies just weren't able to get their transition game going. At the start of the second half, Collingwood adapted and started putting Nick Dacos forward, and they were starting him forward at the centre bounce and then having him push up from the initial stoppage. And Wilfield didn't go with him forward, but it seemed as though in that third quarter he was trying to pick him up on the way through. I still thought it was pretty successful. Wilfield kicked a goal in the third quarter, which was fantastic. And then at three-quarter time, we subbed Wilfield off for Jaden Stevenson. And that's the single biggest decision that changed the game. Now, who knows? Maybe Nick Dacos gets off the chain in the last quarter if Wilfield stays on anyway. But there's no way that you can say that was a good decision, because for at least 2.5 quarters, that tagging job was a success. Liam Shields took over in trying to match up on Nick Dacos in the last quarter. And, he was just torched. There's no other way of putting it. Dacos was dominant in the last quarter, must have had a hand in 2/3 of their scores, finished with 2 goals, 29 disposals and 3 goal assists. And I can guarantee you that is not the kind of impact that he was going to have after 2.5 quarters spent on Will Phillips. So, yeah, I'm really not sure what the thinking was. We've seen that Shields doesn't have the pace to go with quick players. Jason Horne-Francis really torched Liam Shields as well in space. I think he's capable in close when the ball's in tight, but as soon as there's any space or time and running in the game, Shields just doesn't have the leg speed to go with these younger players like he might have, 8 or 9 years ago. Yeah, it's not all down to one player, but ultimately it's not hard to pinpoint. When that changed, the whole game shifted. Didn't appear as though there was an injury with Phillips. It just looked tactical. It's certainly what the AFL app says, and there was no signs that Wilfield was injured. Potentially he was tired, who knows? I'm sure you'd be tired following Nick Dacos around all day, but it was the decision that cost us the game. In terms of what we had control over. And I thought, Wilfield came in for, I think, his 4th game for the year. He was hungry. He was doing whatever he could to stop Nick Dacos. And he didn't play a perfect game, but the fact that he was able to negate his impact quite skillfully and go up the other end and kick a really nice goal. He had some good work around the stoppages, had some good quick hands. Aside from giving away one holding free kick, I think it was maybe early in the second quarter against Nick Dacos, he had a really, really good defensive game. So that one decision had such a massive impact on the game, and someone with the experience of Clarko, I guess that's the thing. Sometimes you make a decision, you come off looking like a genius. This is definitely one of those times where Clarko does not come off looking like a genius at all. Maybe he was trying to get some running into the game and put Jaden Stevenson on, who had an okay last quarter, should have probably kicked a goal or at least got a score from a lovely chain down the wing that ended with a mark to him 35 out on the boundary. But, there was nothing wrong with the game that he played in the last quarter. It's just not what we needed. We needed a player that was going to be capable of shutting Nick Dacos out of the game. And yeah, he took the game away from us. So it was really, really hard to watch that last quarter. And I can't imagine what it would have been like for Wilfield watching on the bench. You know, he's worked so hard all game, and Dacos just essentially takes the game away from us in the last quarter. Anyway, it's not often that in the story of the game I'm talking about one opposition player, one matchup, but looking at the game simplistically, you really could boil it down to that, because I don't think there's any way that Collingwood are able to do what they did without Dacos really getting off chain like he did. And yeah, it was really, really hard to watch. He's such a good player, and a bit of time and space, or even none, but just a bit of touch on the ball, and he has a massive impact with his work rate. So yeah, really, really tough watch. Let's go to the 5 stars, because given how well we played for 2.5 quarters, there was certainly some positives to take out of it. It's really hard to go past Wardlaw for best on, so I'm going to give him the 4 votes. Certainly faded as the game went on, but his first half and probably the start of the third quarter as well, he was scintillating. He was in everything. I think he might have had 10 or 11 first quarter touches. Finished with 30 disposals, kicked a goal, 6 marks, 3 tackles, 6 clearances, 6 inside 50s, 3 goal assists, and just did everything that you would expect the Warlord to do. He was everywhere. His pressure and chasing was also fanatical. There was a couple of times where, sure, he didn't end up impacting the contest, but he chased and was able to put pressure on a couple of different players from the opposition and just didn't give up, which is, the hallmark of George Wardlaw. It was, I think, probably the best and most impactful game I've seen him play for the club in his, short career. Maybe that win that we had last week really spurred something in him, because he was fantastic around the footy, worked really well in tandem with Xerri. I thought, had some fantastic kicks as well, which is not always a strength of his. I think sometimes he tries to bite off a bit too much, but he had a couple of really good kicks, both inside 50 and sort of running through the middle of the ground. Really the only fault in his game, like I said, he did fade a little as the game went on, and I think he probably tired. And the other thing was he had a little bit too much time running into goal. I can't remember when that was. It must have been the last quarter, or maybe it was the second quarter. Probably more likely to be the second quarter, actually. He had a bit more time than he probably thought, and skewed one across the face when he really could have just steadied and kicked a relatively straightforward goal. That was the only blemish in, I thought, like I said, probably his best game for the club. So super, super exciting. I know there's plenty of George Wardlaw fans out there. I don't think he's going to be short of number 6s on North Melbourne jerseys, but yeah, a super, super game. And just, the way that he started with a couple of the other players I'm going to mention in the 5 stars was amazing. So 4 votes to George Wardlaw. 3, I've got to give it to LDU. They were clearly our 2 best midfielders on the day. LDU had 31 disposals, 3 marks, 5 tackles, 7 clearances, had a goal assist, and 8 inside 50s. And just really carried on the fantastic form that he's in. I think he's so confident at the moment, sometimes a little too confident. He did try to take on the opposition a couple of times and got caught today, which is really the only negative, again, on his game. He's such a beast around the footy. He's so strong over the ball. He's just in a perfect place, and I think we're about to see 2 or 3 of the best years of football that we've seen from a North Melbourne player in quite a while, if he can stay fit and he stays at the club. I don't want to dwell too much on the fact that he's a free agent at the end of next year and in serious danger of potentially leaving, but he was fantastic. And like I said, he and Wardlaw, along with Xerri, who I'll talk about in a minute, were just absolutely off the chain in that first part of the game. And I thought that LDU kept it up across the game a little better than Wardlaw did. Only ended up with 1 more disposal, but his impact really wasn't dampened. He had a fantastic moment where he got a chase down and put some pressure on, which is exactly the sort of thing that he wasn't doing earlier on in the year and was getting a little bit criticised for. So you love to see him getting involved defensively as well, and I think that's a big part of why I'm quite happy to give them the 4 and the 3, because they weren't just doing it offensively. There was a lot of tackling and pressure involved in their games as well. So 3 votes LDU, another really fantastic performance, and he will go to the top of the North Podium on 24 total votes for the year, which is fantastic after 13 games. He's really turning this season into, it looks as though it's going to be a best and fairest worthy season at least. We know there's plenty of time left, but he's in some fantastic form. Then it got a little harder. There was a couple of players that I think, could have been considered our third and fourth best on. I ended up going with Cam Zurhaar for the 2 votes, and I think, yes, he did have some nervous moments throughout the game and some moments that I think cost us, probably 2 or 3 errors, but he had 19 disposals, kicked 3 goals, 1, had 9 marks, 2 of them were contested, 6 tackles, a goal assist, 5 inside 50s, and I thought it just shows if you get some ball into that inside 50 and you get some fast ball in there, what a difference it can make for a player like him. He had a really, really slow start to the year, and I just think he's starting to find some form the last month or so. I gave him a vote, I think, 2 weeks ago, maybe it might have been, and now 2 votes again. So the first couple of times he's gotten on into the North Podium votes, and I think, yeah, he's showing some positive signs. I don't think there's a few people online and in circles that are saying he's checked out. I absolutely don't think that. I just think he has that kind of lethargic, laconic look to the way that he plays sometimes. He was spent at the end of the game. He made a bit of an error, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But I think his positives for the game outweighed his negatives. A couple of contested marks. He was probably lucky to be adjudged to have marked one of them, but he just found the right spots forward of the ball, and after he missed or didn't make the distance on one earlier in the game, which actually ended up landing in Larkey's lap, he had a really solid game in front of goals as well, which is really important. So Cam Zurhaar, it's fantastic to have him in the votes. We really need players of his age profile to be playing well and touch wood sticking around. So it's great to have him in the best again. And I've given the last vote to Tristan Xerri. 15 disposals, 2 goals, 30 hit-outs, 7 of those to advantage, 3 marks, 6 tackles, 4 clearances. And for me, it was those 2 goals that just got him above the other players that I'll mention in a minute. It wasn't one of his absolutely dominant performances in the ruck. I think that he probably just edged out Darcy Cameron for the ruck battle, had a few less hit-outs, but more to advantage. And the 2 goals around the ground were fantastic goals too. It wasn't just a couple of easy goals from in tight or in the goal square. He took a mark outside 50 and smashed it through from there. And he won probably a fortunate free kick on the boundary line and kicked a drop punt from maybe 35 or 40 metres out on the boundary as well. So 2 really massive goals to go with, I would say, a pretty serviceable performance in the ruck. It gets him the 1 vote. He did give away one of the free kicks in that run-on, which allowed Collingwood back into the game in the last quarter, but I thought that was a pretty unfortunate, trying to wrestle with the Collingwood player, and his hand sort of slipped up onto the face. It's just unfortunate. I'll let him go with that one. It wasn't one of his brain fades that he had the week before. So 1 vote to Xerri. Again, just such a fantastic thing to have him in such fantastic form this year, and I think all of us are looking at him pretty comfortable with the ruckman that we've got moving forward into the next couple of years, whilst we wait for someone like Taylor Goad to hopefully come on and be a long-term replacement potentially. In terms of honourable mentions, I thought Charlie Conman had a great game in defence, was intercepting really well, took some brave marks, and didn't make any of those silly mistakes that we've seen from him sometimes in defence. Given it's still a pretty new and unfamiliar role to him, I thought he was definitely in with a shot for the 2 or the 1 vote. Bailey Scott was back to his best, kicked a goal and had 20-something disposals. I thought, playing that wing role, which we know he can play so well, and did so for the last couple of years. He really found some form and could have been good for the 1 vote. Wilfield had a great negating tagging role until he got taken off, I thought at least, and was able to hit the scoreboard. Probably not quite good enough to get a vote based on what we saw whilst he was on, but I really, in good conscience, couldn't give him the vote given he got subbed out. And my partner Shannon really wanted Nick Larkey to get into the 5 stars, just not for the right reasons, I would say. She was pretty keen for him to get in based on his little hand pass over the top to Bryn Teakle late in the game, which resulted in Bryn Teakle's first goal for the club. A good sportsmanship vote she was hoping for, and he had a monster first quarter with his 4 goals. I just need to see that continued across the game for him to get into the vote. So not from me. Shannon would have given him a vote or two. So if you're following her votes, they're probably slightly different to mine. In terms of the best opposition player, look, obviously Nick Dacos was fantastic late. Crisp was involved in all their action going through the middle of the ground. He always tortures us, but it's hard to go past Bobby Hill. Only 10 disposals, but kicked 5 goals, 7 marks, and one of those, it's going to be pretty hard to go past for Mark of the Year. Got up in exactly that's the same spot that Gary Moorcroft took Mark of the Year in whatever year that was, like 2001 maybe. I don't quite recall what year it was. Similar spot, not quite the same, and then he took it right on someone's head, but just got that perfect elevation off the pack. Took it really high and then went back and kicked the goal. It's one of those ones where if he hadn't landed on his feet, I think it probably looks better. He falls even further, but he probably would have hurt himself falling that far. He was so far up. Every supporter that's not a North Melbourne supporter is jumping off their couch and shouting when they see a mark like that. It was fantastic, and there's nothing that the poor old Jackson Archer could do, who was his opponent for most of the day. Archer did spend a bit of time on Schultz, but most of his time was on Bobby Hill, and he's just that really, really hard combination of super fast and agile, super strong. He can jump, and he just kills you with any little mistake that you make. So Bobby Hill, I thought, was probably across the game their best. Schultz also, I think, kicked 4 goals, but to be honest, I think he was pretty lucky to have a couple of them. He got some pretty soft free kicks, so I didn't think that was the case with Bobby Hill. I thought he earned all of his, and I think was best on for the Pies across the game, even if it was Nick Dacos really turning the game in the last quarter. In terms of the standings for the North Podium, that does mean that LDU is now standalone on top on 24 votes. Harry Sheasel in second place, 21. Tristan Xerri third place, 18. So they're a fair way ahead, those three. It's going to be really hard to catch them. It's hard to see anyone that's not one of those three winning or sitting atop the podium at the end of the year. Tom Powell still 10 votes. He had another quiet game. George Wardlaw into 5th on 9 votes, and Charlie Comben on 7 votes. So that's what the podium looks like at the moment. It's those three, LDU, Sheasel and Xerri, are really running away with it at the moment, but Wardlaw, Powell, Comben are the next most likely to potentially jump up and jump into a second or a third at least. But it's really hard to see someone else getting past those three for the win at the end of the year. As per usual, I'll just take this quick opportunity to have a quick call to action. Please share the podcast out with any North Melbourne fans you know. Help me get the word out there. And you can also do that by subscribing on your chosen podcast service, leaving a rating or a review, particularly if it's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I know it's really easy to leave a rating on those services. You can get involved with me on social media at NorthPod Show, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, all of those good places. And if you would like to go the extra mile and support me and support the show, you can do so on buymeacoffee.com/NorthPodShow. I do promise to use those funds to buy me a Coke, not a coffee, and I really appreciate those people that have contributed to the show so far. But there is, of course, no obligation, and I'm going to be sticking around making this podcast regardless. So negatives, we always try to start with the negatives. And I think the most obvious one, the one that needs the most time, I've really already spoken about. Wilful getting subbed out and releasing Dacos cost us the game, unequivocally. There's no other way to look at it. That is the biggest negative. And it's unfortunate because we're paying Alistair Clarkson a lot of money to make these decisions. And look, if Wilful actually, it turns out, was injured or was absolutely cooked, maybe there's a little bit less in this decision, but either way, we weren't able to plan for or negate Nick Dacos after that point. And it's hard to argue with the fact that Wilfil getting subbed was the main reason for that. So for me, that's the biggest negative. That's not something 100% in the player's control. That's a coaching decision, and they're the sort of decisions that, we do not want coaching decisions to be costing us games because we're spending a lot of money and we've got a lot of experience in that area. It's the inexperience on field that we're hoping to negate. So Yeah, that was obviously a big negative, but I have already touched on that at the top of the show, so I won't dwell on that one. I think the second one is the obvious one in terms of every week we talk about it. It's an issue all the time. We just cannot stop the opposition from getting a run on and getting momentum and kicking consecutive goals. It looked like in the first half and even early in the third quarter, we were able to stop them. The Pies had kicked 2 or 3 and then we'd come back and kick 2 or 3 of our own. But they were unfortunately able to kick 7 goals in a row, which started at the end of the third quarter and went late into the fourth. And whilst we were great at winning the centre clearances and the clearances in general across the day, when the opposition gets those run-ons, we're unable to actually get a clean win out of the middle and in order to stop that momentum. It's a big issue, and I'm sure a big part of it is our age profile in the middle there with Wardlaw and Tommy Powell and Will Phil at times today. You know, we don't have a lot of big-bodied experience in there. Xerri is still a young ruckman. But we've got to get, that's the big area that we've got to get better at. We've been getting that feedback all year. I'm sure you could look across most games and we've conceded big chunks of consecutive goals. The same thing happened to us in the Fremantle game in round 2. A pretty similar profile game, to be honest, where we really had a fantastic half and then just, got ran down. Although that was a little less heartbreaking because they actually ended up comfortably beating us. The 1 point loss hurts. I didn't probably touch on just to the extent. It's the hope that gets you in the end. Just watching this game, you know, as a North supporter, you know that there's going to be trouble later on. And to then go down losing by 1 point after poor old Zach Fisher misses that goal. And anyway, I'll talk a little bit about those missed opportunities in a minute. Let me circle back to where I was. The clearance game across the day, we won 40-38, but it's when the opposition's having a run on and they have the momentum, we are just not able to turn those clearances into positive play for us or to actually get a clearance to get the ball down our end and then just lock it in for a few minutes. We can't do it, unfortunately, and that's been the trend all year. Like I said, we were scintillating early, and when we're up and about, our midfield is nearly unstoppable. And I think it's just one of those things that, unfortunately, it's a time thing. We've got to get more games into those young mids, get them more experience in situations like this so that in the future, when the Pies kick their third or their fourth goal, we're able to go in there, have a clear plan and execute it so that even if we're not scoring, we're stopping the opposition from scoring and stopping their momentum because, you know, most games we play, we're going to have a crowd that's less than the opposition. It's just a fact. Any Melbourne team we're playing, generally speaking, we're going to be outnumbered. And as soon as the crowd was brought into the game in late in the third and in the fourth quarter, that momentum builds, and you know you could tell that our players were walking back to the middle of the ground, going, "Oh, I hope we don't concede the next one," rather than how are we going to win it out of the middle and kick the next one. So that is a big area that I really think needs to be addressed next season or in the off season. Like what game plan and what do we have situationally that we go to when the opposition kicks their third or their fourth goal in a row? What are we doing to at least lock the game down and stop that run on? And again, that to me, that feels at least partly like a coach's box decision. Obviously, there's player execution that goes into that, but there is absolutely a part that the coaches can play in that. 666 means that you can't have a much of an adjustment from the moment the ball is bounced. But after that, if you need to throw someone back or if you need to adjust the way you're setting up at stoppage, whatever it is, like there's plenty of ways to change your setup. I think we've got to try and find something that's going to allow us to, like I said, stop opposition run-ons. The last one is a bit of a broad one. It's the old we had opportunities late. And some of the negatives came through our mistakes. Some of the negatives came from the umpires swallowing the whistle. But that's what they tend to do at the end of the games. And I know that personally, I've always been an advocate for if a free kick is there, you pay it. And it doesn't matter what time of the game it is, you pay it. There are some people that say, let the game flow, don't pay the ticky-touch wood ones. And there are some people that are totally happy that late in the game that, you know, some of those more 50-50 decisions don't get paid. And all I can say is we know that in general, the umpires are more lenient and less likely to blow the whistle late in games. Like we've got years and years of evidence of that. So I don't think that in particular we were robbed, because all I think we got was the kind of umpiring that happens late in games all the time. But if we just look at what happened, with a minute or so, we were out, we were down the wing. Bailey Scott missed a kick that he should have hit. I don't recall if he was trying to hit Zurhaar or if then it ended up sort of fumbling towards Zurhaar. He then was a little fumbly and should have got the kick to Curtis Taylor, who was free inside 50, but he didn't have the legs in him. He looked tired. He didn't make a good choice, and the ball ended up going out of bounds for a throw-in. If we're able to execute there, we have a scoring shot. Maybe we miss a goal, but we definitely would have had a scoring shot, because there's no doubt that Curtis Taylor could have taken a mark. Or if Bailey Scott had hit the earlier kick, Zurhaar or whoever it was is turning around and has a really good opportunity to kick it inside 50 to one-on-ones, because we were out in the quick play. So, we burned ourselves there. Darcy Tucker had a chance with a kick around the corner to kick a goal or a point with, I don't know, maybe 45 seconds to go. I don't remember exactly how long was left at that point. But it didn't make the distance and it went out of bounds for a boundary throw-in. Shortly after that, we had Zach Fisher, who snapped and just missed. It just went the other side of the goalpost. And that brought the margin back to 1 point. But there was, I think, 2 or 3 seconds left on the clock when that went through. So that was essentially the last action of the game. Collingwood did kick out, and the ball and the siren went pretty much as soon as that ball was 40 or 50 metres away from goal. So we had our chances that we could take late. We just weren't able to, and that's the classic. We haven't been in this situation enough times where we're the better side and we're actually got the momentum. That it was actually the exact sort of situation where Collingwood of last year and at times this year does everything right and wins the game, because they're so good in those tight game scenarios. So super, super disappointing that with what we had, we weren't able to make those opportunities. You can also look at the umpiring decisions. Like there were certainly some questionable ones at the end. I do feel like that they're worth mentioning. Bailey Scott took a mark maybe 90 seconds to go, and it very clearly had Sidebottom and another Collingwood player run well over the mark. I think they didn't realise that the ball had gone 15 metres or, whatever. But to have two of them go that far over the mark, I think any other situation in the game, it's called 50. It wasn't, and then Bailey Scott played on anyway and got the ball forward. But he would have been having a shot, on a fair angle, but maybe 30 metres out from goal. So, you'd back him to probably kick that 6 or 7 times out of 10. Nick Dacos appeared to get pinged he didn't get pinged. He appeared to drop it directly in front of goal, maybe 20 metres out. Again, in a massive pack, in a situation where it's really hard, and I don't think the umpires often pay things like that late. But, yeah, objectively, to me, it looked as though he'd had prior and didn't get a handball away. There was also one way earlier on in the game where Bailey Scott, to what it looked like on the screen, and certainly he thought he got a touch on a kick at goal that was called a goal and then didn't get called back. It didn't appear as though it was looked super closely at by the ARC. It's always hard to say because we don't know what ARC's looking at, but they didn't ask for the ball to be held up, which is what the protocol's supposed to be. But maybe they had looked at it and looked at a few angles and they thought it was all clear, but it certainly appeared as though Bailey Scott got a hand on it. So all of these things are things that happened that, North supporters are probably thinking, gee, we were unlucky. And you're not wrong. But I also think there were things that went our way in the game. Like Tristan Xerri got the smallest of nudges over the boundary line and got a free kick, which is the goal where he kicked it, from the boundary line 35 or 40 out. Like, to me, I don't think that's a free kick. I think Zurhaar took a contested mark where he was very lucky that he got called for a mark. I think, to me, it looked play on. So, of course, you want to look at those late decisions. They're always scrutinised more. But I do think that, earlier on in the game, we probably got the rub of the green. Yes, Collingwood got it late, and it's the weight of free kicks that they got late. I think it was 12-2 or something like that in the last quarter, or in the second half, rather. But I try not to look at free kick counts because, I don't need to tell you guys, you're an intelligent group of listeners, but there's absolutely no rule that says the free kick count needs to be level. You just want all of the free kicks that are there to be paid and none of the free kicks that aren't there to not be paid. I don't know if I said that right, but you know what I mean. I think on balance, the umpiring probably evens out, and it's just those late game decisions that, feel more important. We all know though, if we don't concede 7 goals in a row, this is irrelevant. So, yep, there were things that could have gone our way, but unfortunately, like the West Coast game, we let them kick too many goals, but this time we were playing a much better side. And you go back to last week against West Coast, where I think that's what made that Elliot Yeo holding the ball free kick so much more surprising, is that it was paid in that game situation. I think it's very rare that kind of decision's made in that situation that late. Anyway, let's move on to the positives, because there were lots of positives. I really don't want to dwell on the sorts of things that we can't control, like those umpiring decisions. I mean, the first half showed glimpses of what the future could be, with LDU and Wardlaw working with Xerri in the middle of the ground. Like I said, Wardlaw and LDU were absolutely sensational in that first quarter. Their connection with Larkey was elite. It was some of the best service that Larkey's had as a forward. One of his goals did come from a bit of a lucky, sort of fell on his lap after Zurhaar didn't quite make the distance. But his other 3 were some fantastic kicks to him on the lead. He looked unstoppable in the first quarter, and Darcy Moore got moved off him, at least temporarily, so that Jeremy Howe could have a go. Whenever he gets decent service, he takes full advantage, and I don't think that he was completely shut out of the game. Because of the fact that Collingwood then sent a bit more attention his way, that allowed players like Pink and Teakle and Paul Curtis and Harry Sheasel more opportunities. And we took them in the first half. So, yeah, it was fantastic. Just an amazing first quarter to watch. A major difference to what we've been able to see is we still made a few of those mistakes that we've been prone to for the last 5 years. But with our pressure and our tackling, we were able to mitigate and limit the damage from those turnovers. The 62 tackles for the game, 15 of those were inside our forward 50, which those are the sort of numbers that at the start of the year were just fanciful. That just wasn't going to happen. So having the example set by big blokes like Xerri and Pink, who had some really, really fantastic tackling efforts throughout the game, just sets the example for everyone. If players that size can be doing it, everyone can. Xerri, like I said, had some fantastic tackles that led to free kicks. Toby Pink had a couple of great efforts in the third quarter, I think, that led to the goal that he kicked. It was nice that he was able to kick a regulation goal, not as opposed to his little toe poke score reviewed goal that he kicked earlier in the year. But that was on the back of him having an unrewarded tackle on the wing and then a rewarded tackle inside 50, which he then kicked a goal from. So, yeah, just the pressure and the capacity for our good players to play well in the first quarter really set us up with that high-scoring first quarter. And, I was certainly watching it nervous, but I was watching it going, gee, there's a lot to like about the way that we're playing. And that 3-pronged tall forward line looked really dangerous at times. We had some absolutely massive packs gathering, and that did allow for other players to get some opportunity, which I'll talk about in a minute. The second thing was just our accurate goal kicking. It's the second week in a row that we've been really accurate, and it's allowed us to get these big leads that we have ended up giving up, but we've at least been able to establish a large lead, in large part due to our accurate kicking. Not only are we converting more of the shots on goal, but we're also converting more of our inside 50s to shots. So 51 inside 50s this week. We just won the inside 50 count by 3. 53% of those led to a score, which is 10% higher than our season average. Unfortunately, the Pies won at 63%, so they betted us by 10% on the day. That's a reflection of the deficiencies that we have in defence, and also just the way the game was played, because it was such a frenetic, fast-paced game that, generally speaking, a lot of the time the ball was going into the respective forward lines with not a lot of pressure on it, and often it resulted in goals to both sides. So the fact that our forward line is functioning better is fantastic. I definitely think having that extra height down there with Teakle and Pink in there is making a massive difference. It's definitely creating more opportunities for Paul Curtis to crumb rather than to play the marking game. And he did that this game with 2 crumbing goals. Both Pink and Teakle did a great job of either marking it or taking some grabs a bit further up the ground, which allowed us to keep the ball moving forward. Look, and we struggled to maintain it all game, but when it was working, it looked fantastic. And I think I'm not convinced that, having three tall forwards with that being the setup, that being the makeup is the way forward all year. But I just think it's good to see a little bit of extra aerial support for Larkey. And maybe, when we look to get maybe Zane Durza back in the side, maybe that means that Toby Pink comes out, for example, because I think Teakle definitely looks like the better option as the second ruckman, and had a really good first game, I thought, Brent Teakle. Ended up with a goal, thanks to Larkey giving him the Joe the Goose out the back, but he looked pretty good in the ruck, I thought. Took a couple of good marks, did a couple of nice things. He's not going to, change the game for us, but I think he's a really good addition to that forward line. So great that he was able to come in off very little preparation in terms of synergy with the side, and you'd expect that he's only going to get better with a bit more time spent with the mids and the forwards. Whilst the last quarter was really ugly to watch, I think holistically across the game, there were some fantastic highlights that I've got no doubt will be spotlit throughout the week. None of them more meme-worthy than Aidan Corr pushing out Beau McQuarrie. That was... It was just... Aidan Corr's good for one or two of those a year. We had his fantastic step that he put on in the back pocket last year. We had his wonderful overlapping goal that he kicked, courtesy of a Kane Turner handball. And this was just, it was the classic perfect situation where McQuarrie's off balance a little. He's side on, so Aidan Corr's well within his rights to just shove him as hard as he likes because it's not getting into his back. And he sent him into row M. It was fantastic. That was a great highlight. The Wilfield goal was fantastic. You could see how much it meant to him, and I really do hope that this game is the start of something for Wilfield's year. I really hope that he can turn it around. The Xerri rundown tackle, the Xerri goal from the boundary, the Sheasel handball over his head in half a second was fantastic. Just Wardlaw's first half and his capacity to hit targets by foot. Nick Larkey's first quarter. The pressure leading to turnover and running and gunning through the middle of the ground, biting off those risky kicks and playing on at all costs. We saw that frenetic play on really up until the last quarter. That's when either we ran out of gas or the game tightened up a little bit and we didn't feel like we could take it on like we had. But Curtis Taylor kicked one where he, ran onto a loose ball in the goal square and kicked it out the back. That doesn't happen if we weren't playing on at all costs. Tommy Powell took a mark 55 or so metres out and just fired off a really quick under-pressure handball that allowed that quick entry. And I think it might have been LDU, I can't recall, but whoever he handballed to missed Larkey on the lead. Or, again, I'm a bit blurry on the details now. I'm trying to block out parts of the game, but he missed a player on the lead, but it just went over both their heads, and Curtis Taylor was free in the goal square. And the only reason that happens is because of how fast we'd moved the ball, because if it had been a bit more stop-start, the Collingwood wingmen are able to get back and defend, and Curtis Taylor's not free there. So I really do hope that there's heaps of highlights shown to the North players this week. Of course, it is gut-wrenching to lose like that. There's no doubt about it. I was really, really flat and just felt empty afterwards. But so many positives that you can also take out of it. I do hope that, whilst we're reflecting on what went wrong, we're also celebrating what went right at the club during the week, because there was so many positives to come out of it. I think that'll do for the match roundup. We'll whip through the VFL news and look ahead quickly to next week like we always do. Also, a really good game in the VFL. We were winners 120-79 over the Pies VFL side, and we led all day. Unfortunately, it appears as though, and there's no confirmation yet, I'm recording this on Sunday evening, so I've got nothing to report yet, but Braden George apparently may have hurt his ACL again, which, if is the case, it would be devastating. He certainly hurt his knee and looked really frustrated, so fingers crossed that it's not an ACL, but it didn't look good. Aside from that, potentially really, really devastating news, we had some good performers in the VFL. Dylan Stevens had 30 disposals and kicked 2 goals. Zane Duursma spent some time in the middle, kicked 3 goals and had 25 disposals, so I think it's fantastic that he's getting some touch at VFL level. Cooper Harvey had 3 goals and 21 touches. Zurhaar, we know what he can do at VFL level. I don't think 30 touches is going to get done for him. Bergman is back in the VFL with 21 touches, so we'll be pushing for a defensive spot potentially. Geordie Payne kicked his first goal and had 17 disposals. Sellers 3 goals, Maley 2 goals, Hansen Jr. 2 goals. So there was plenty of action and plenty of the players getting involved. So whilst I'm not expecting much to change in terms of the lineup for next week, there are players putting some pressure on, which is fantastic. And a player like Jaden Stevenson, his spot's certainly up for grabs. So it might be that Dersma comes in for him. I don't think Curtis Taylor is playing so well that his spot's a lock. So, there's every chance that someone like Dylan Stevens or Miller Bergman could come back in and fill a role like that. So, yeah, plenty to like. Greenwood did his usual thing, had 20 disposals and 13 clearances. So he'd be fantastic depth for that midfield if we feel as though we can afford to go a little slower through the middle of the ground. Winning form at VFL level is what you want. So great that we've got some players in good form. I wouldn't expect many of them to be pushing and playing. I think Hardiman was the non-playing emergency, so unfortunately doesn't get to press his chances in the VFL, but great that we've got plenty of good play there. Another reason why a player like Bergman is a potential to get in for next week, or maybe Riley Hardiman, I suspect Callan Dawson might cop a suspension for a week or two. Had a bit of a late hit on a Collingwood player. It wasn't a bump in the sense that it was a hip and shoulder. It was more like sort of front on forearm or elbow to the face, and it wasn't. He probably just should have pulled out a little more. He didn't absolutely push through the opposition. They played on, so yeah, I'd suspect it might be a week or two, which is unfortunate because we want to get more games into Callan Dawson, and I thought he played a decent game down back, but yeah, it's hard to see him missing. It's hard to see him playing next week, given the protection around the head these days. Speaking of next week, we are playing Melbourne Saturday, 22nd of June. It's a night game, 7:30 at the G. They are coming off the bye, so I don't have high hopes. We're coming off a 6-day break. But look, you never know. I didn't have high hopes going into this week. Their forward line is a weakness, and so is our defence. So I feel like that's a good matchup for us. It's sort of a bit of a break even there. Christian Petrarca is a big out for them. And it's our one game at the MCG for the year. So it would be great to put on a good show. If I was to be a little bit pessimistic, I do think a game like this where you lose it by 1 point and it's devastating, it sometimes leads to a bit of a letdown the next week. Often doesn't bode well. So I hope I'm wrong about that, but yeah, it was a really deflating feeling after that game, and I think a mature group would be much easier to bounce back. Hopefully players like Shields, like McDonald and Simpkin are getting around the blokes during the week and just reinforcing that we did a lot of things right. Another win's not far away if we continue to do those sorts of things, because it's super, super disappointing to lose and to lose in such a devastating way, but at least we were in the game and we had some patches where we absolutely dominated, which, I mentioned during the bye week. We've really struggled to be in games, and now we've had back-to-back games that we're in, one which we ended up winning and one which we've ended up just losing. So I really hope that we're able to see the positives from it. It's a gut-wrenching, deflating way to lose, but, there's some positives there, and this is the sort of thing that we were really hoping to see coming into the season, is George Wardlaw having breakout games like he did. So that's going to do it for the podcast. Thank you so much again for listening. I do really appreciate everyone who listens, particularly those that listen after a loss, just because I know it's so much harder to want to go and consume some content when things aren't going well. So I really do appreciate everyone for listening. As always, I hope you have a fantastic week, and yeah, we'll have a chat after the Melbourne game next weekend, and hopefully it's more positives and not a repeat of the Melbourne game at the MCG last season, which I recall was probably the low point. That was the one where Charlie Coleman went down with his season-ending injury, and it was also a near 100-point flogging. So anything would be better than that for this week, I think. sorry to end on that note. Go North, as always, and enjoy the week. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.